You're It. I'm Amanda Malcolm, and you're listening to You're It Girl, a podcast focused on you and what propels you, because that past, it does not define you. Your time is now, and you're it, girl. Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Malcolm, host of You're It Girl, and today is the first day of spring. It's a season of rebirth and new beginnings. So whoever's listening to this first episode, I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate you, and you're it, girl. And if you're a guy, you're it too. And you know that thing that kind of completely consumes you, that you think about over and over again, that you kind of try to squash, but it just kind of keeps being thrust into your path. It kind of becomes that thing that either paralyzes you or propels you. And I feel like fear often has that effect on people. Fear of what you're going to say, fear of what you don't say, fear of what you're going to do, fear of what you don't do, fear of how people are going to think about you, how their perception of you is going to change over these things. When people look at me, they often describe me as fearless. My own daughter would describe me that way. In fact, a couple months ago over Halloween, we are in the car and we're driving her to school. And this commercial comes on, this ad about, it's a movie for Halloween. So it's haunted something with ghosts. And I start yelling. I say, oh my gosh, I have to turn this down. I can't listen to this. And she's in the back seat and she's like, Mama, you hiked Kilimanjaro. You're literally fearless and you're afraid of some ghosts? And I said, yeah, you can't see ghosts, so you don't know when they're coming for you. And that moment really made me think hard about the things that haunt us. The ghosts of our past, the ghosts of our present, the ghosts of our future, the things that we can't see, yet we seem to be afraid of. I don't really think about these things, and I really don't like to talk about them, and I definitely don't like to share them. In fact, only my closest friends, probably not even some of my family members, know some of the things that I'm going to say, because I literally have an extreme aversion to victim mentality. I just don't like to be labeled that way. So it's much easier for me to focus on the positive. What can be seen can be explained. It's easy for me to share that stuff. And that's the kind of stuff I put out there on social media. And that's what I really intended on doing with this podcast, focusing on all the positive, all the pretty, all the things that we think sort of propel us into success. Those drivers are our triumphs, right? But then something sort of beyond my comprehension happened this last year. I feel like every time I turned around, it was like the Holy Ghost was haunting me by putting people in my path, people that I knew really well and people that I didn't know at all, that were all coming to me with the same message. And then one day I'm in this room and I'm listening to this presentation to hundreds of people. And this person is preaching at the top of their lungs, and literally they are looking straight into my eyes. I basically feel like I'm being yelled at. And this person is basically saying, this person is you. You're it, girl. What are you doing? These things that happen to you for a reason. This is your gift, and you need to make it your calling. Wake up. Tag you're it, now run with it. And so, You're It Girl was basically created by her ghosts, but she was inspired by all the remarkable women in my life and all the remarkable women out there navigating this extraordinary opportunity at life, who desire to be healthy, confident, feminine, yet independent, and who develop the ability to truly see beyond the limits of fear, who see their individual experiences not as limitations that define them, but as opportunities to propel themselves forward, to inspire and uplift each other, and in turn, live and love vibrantly. So this podcast is going to dive into some topics that are dark, controversial, and serious. And of course, in a typical Amanda Malcolm style, if you know me, and I'm sure many of you listening to this first podcast do know me, I'll definitely be sure to mix in some of that humor and edginess, because after all, I do believe that laughter is the best medicine. And the purpose, though, is really to talk about and share a lot of things that people are afraid or too comfortable to address. And so I just want to buffer this and say that this content is not going to be for everyone. But my hope is that by sharing and talking about our ghosts, that we will create a community that offers support and encouragement, that gives us the strength and the confidence to propel us to do the things that we desire. And I realize that it starts with me. I was called to do it, and so now it's my purpose. And with that purpose comes great responsibility. Over the years, I've met with a lot of women that have reached out to me personally. And if you have reached out to me, I just wanted to say thank you for your bravery, because I realized as I've been thinking about this that I'm a bit unapproachable. And I know if you know me, you're scratching your head thinking, like, why would she say that? But the truth is that I've analyzed it, and people have told me that I'm a little bit unapproachable. And I've analyzed it, and I know why. And it's because the perception that I've created is that my life is pretty close to perfect. You know, I've got a daughter who's like adorable and hilarious, who I absolutely love. I have this great career that is my passion that I absolutely love. I've got a really cute dog and a semi-cute cat that kind of has like a tilted head that is sort of referred to as the exorcist kitty by a lot of my friends. I've got a perfect family, came from money. I've got a great ex-husband who's a stellar dad, and I probably got money from him when I got a divorce. And, you know, I get to volunteer because it's fun and it sort of fits the mold of what you'd expect from me. And on my free time, I travel the world, bebopping with my besties without a care in the world. And the perception that I have created on social media and with most people that, you know, see me in this way is that life has really been rainbows and sunshine since July 10th, 1985, when I made my debut into the world. So here goes. I'm from a family of 8. Have you ever seen that movie Groundhog Day? It was filmed in my town, a little town called Woodstock, Illinois, where I was born. And Bill Murray's in that movie. And every day he wakes up and it's sort of kind of the same day repeated over and over again, which is ironic that it was filmed in my town because sometimes it really reminds me of my childhood in a lot of ways. The same day is repeated over and over again, although, you know, not so much in a good way. There were a lot of us. My dad worked a lot. In fact, I changed my first diaper when I was 3 years old. And I love babies. I mean, you're one of 8, you know, it never really bothered me. You're from a big family. So if you are from one, there's just kind of things that you sort of do that are they just sort of become part of your role. And people always thought that we came from a lot of money. And I guess this is really where I learned the power of perception that I now kind of refer to as the power of deception, and not necessarily in a bad way, but it's just that, you know, we didn't really have much money. And what we did have initially came from 2 places. One, my grandparents, bless their souls. And 2, my dad's first career. His first career that I really know of was in his 20s, where he dealt cocaine. And yes, he was a drug dealer. And basically, one day he got busted in a sting operation and, you know, had to go to jail. And my mom's parents bailed him out. They were always kind of doing that sort of thing, which I realize now as an adult is like complete enabling. But they did kind of save the day at the time. And he had to make a deal to stay out of prison. A deal that he took seriously for the rest of his life, because when you make mistakes like that, they affect you forever. I'm grateful that it happened that way, though, because otherwise I wouldn't have had a dad, because he would have been in prison. And let me just say, my dad was never a drug addict. He doesn't have addictive tendencies. He was a drug dealer, and he was probably just looking for an easy way to make money as he was a young guy. And, you know, he was starting to grow a family. Not that that makes it right, but sometimes young people don't make the best decisions. But he got a second chance. And, you know, God has a way of giving us second chances. Sometimes we just don't always recognize them when they come. Thankfully, he did. And, you know, sometimes those second chances aren't necessarily under the best circumstances, and your second chance might not be ideal. But a second chance is a second chance. My dad can't vote, and I'm sure he was on probation for a while. Honestly, I've never actually asked him the entire story. But I do know he was given a second chance, and at least he was able to be there for his family. And he worked hard for the rest of his life. 8 kids, I can tell you, is nothing but expensive. I don't think my mom ever really let my dad kind of forget about that mistake and that her parents sort of bailed him out and saved the day, which is ironic, really, because I remember, being 4 years old and my dad coming home and my mom asking us to go downstairs and spy to find out where he hid those little white bags, which were bags of cocaine, which I didn't really realize, obviously, at the time what they were. But we would come up the stairs of the basement, reporting to my mom, all excited. And, kids are excited when they kind of discover something, And so oftentimes, we kind of blew the cover, and my dad would get very upset because my mom kind of liked to sneak into his little stash and use it with sort of some family members and friends. So she had some addictive tendencies that I didn't really realize, obviously, at the time. My mom had so many kids, so she was always pregnant and nursing. And so even though she had these tendencies early on, we didn't notice them until much later. I guess you could say we really kept my mom sober for most of my life. So from about 5 to 10 years old, I actually have really good memories. Life was happy. I felt safe. I felt secure. But it was about the time that my mom had baby number 6, which is my sister Mackenzie, and she decided to go back to work. And when she went back to work, my sister was about, I don't know, maybe 9 months old. And, I had a lot of responsibility being one of the oldest of the kids. So my mom went back to work. She was bartending, and my dad would come home. And I mean, he was just exhausted. He's working 14, 16-hour days. Now he's coming home. He's watching his 6 kids. And, so a lot of times I was taking care of my little sister. I'd be upstairs, patting her little diapered butt, trying to get her to sleep for 30, 45 minutes on my tiptoes over her crib. And I got to tell you, sometimes I was really annoyed. I felt like it was something that a kid shouldn't really be doing all the time. But, those are just the things that you do when you're in a big family. Over some time, my mom kind of started to come home later and later. And I think we could all tell that maybe something was up. One day, I was about, 11 years old, and a man came over to our house, and I greeted him at the door, opened the door, and I'm watching the exchange between them, realizing that my mom has a relationship with this person. This was my mom's first affair, and it would be the first of many affairs that she would have. And it's really interesting because I didn't really fully understand at the time, but kids are so bright. They're so smart. They can pick up on energy that you wouldn't believe. And so I knew that I was not to mention that this person came over to our house. Now, my mom did not tell me to lie. I just knew that to protect my mom, this would be something that I would never bring up. Over some time, my dad got suspicious as well, and eventually he ended up finding out that my mom was having this affair and called the wife of the person she was having an affair with. As you can imagine, things kind of blew up pretty quickly. My parents obviously were not in a very good place, and my mom became so depressed. I remember her sitting in the little library of our house just writing pages and pages of letters to this man. And I would sneak in and read them. These are things that an 11-year-old should not be reading, by the way. And so I could understand some of it, but not a lot of it. And at the time, I had a best friend, and I confided in her parents, and they were very uncomfortable. Now, I lived in the Midwest at the time, and I think anybody would be uncomfortable with this, but during that time frame, they basically just shot it down, said I didn't know what I was reading. I didn't understand that there's no idea. There's no way that this thing could have happened. And they basically just didn't address it. And this was kind of one of the first times that I had reached out, to adults as a child, like looking for advice, and realized that, adults aren't always, they're not always gonna be there for you. My mom at this time wasn't exactly in the best state of mind. She was not in a place where she really kind of felt like caring for my youngest sister. And so we always had this very close bond. But my mom sort of developed this resentment towards her that's really carried on into her life. It didn't help that, one day we go to the emergency room and my sister is sick and, she's getting poked with needles and she's screaming. And instead of screaming, "Mama," she screams my name, which was also her first word, by the way. So you can sort of imagine just how involved I was at that point in her, day to day. She felt very close to me. And that's why I always hold her so dearly. Looking back, this is really kind of the start of a turning point of what kind of started as this sort of nightmare. My mom also started drinking at this time. She every night would sort of have her nightcap, which at the time was Cuervo Gold tequila chased with a Girl Scout mint cookie. I mean, ironic, but that was her drink of choice and the snack that she used to chase it. Super weird. I spent a lot of time in the counselor's office because my mom's relationship and my relationship was a little bit toxic. It was a lot of yelling and a lot of fighting. During this same time, I have no recollection whatsoever at the moment in time in which it began or how. And I think these are things that you just kind of block out. And this is actually the part of the story that I was going to leave out. But I feel like it is very important because it resonates with so many women out there. At that age, I was also molested. And it would continue for several years until I was about 14 or so. And what I know about this now is actually that age kind of makes sense if that's happened. Obviously, I've, talked to therapists about this. And a lot of times, if someone is doing that, they're sort of attracted to an adolescent, right? And then as you sort of hit puberty, then it sort of changes a little bit. That attraction does. And so unfortunately for me, I was a late bloomer. But the way that it ended is really interesting. This person wrote on a piece of paper, "Do you like when I do this to you?" And I responded, "No." And they said, "Do you want me to stop?" And I said, "Yes." And the person stopped. And that was sort of my first lesson as to the power of no. Such a small word that seems sort of insignificant, but there's so much meaning and so much strength behind it. Have you ever thought about that is one of the first words that a human being learns? The word no. And the word no is important because it's a way that you can protect yourself mentally, emotionally, physically. It's a small word with a tremendous amount of power. And so I realized even though it was only written on a piece of paper and I wouldn't find my voice later to use the word no, with such strength, that I really wish I would have said it sooner. Because I know that person did touch other people. And I know because those people have confided in me. And so I wish that I just would have said no a lot earlier. And perhaps that person would have stopped. Halfway through middle school, my mom became pregnant again, and she had my little brother, Tanner. He was early. He was in the NICU. And my mom was really just sort of mesmerized by him. I think this sort of kind of stopped her like downward, spiral and really put her back on track. And when she's on track, she's such a great mom, so involved and so vibrant. Everybody just loves her. And she just was so into my little brother. And I think all of us were so scared that he wasn't going to make it. And when he did, I just remember her bringing him home and everyone was just in awe of him. He was so tiny. I would change his diaper and his legs were so skinny. I literally thought that I would break them. So he really was kind of this miracle baby. And my mom would end up having one more child, the eighth child, my little sister, Hallie. And I actually saw my mom deliver my sister, Hallie. And I was 14 and a half when she was born. And it was the most extraordinary experience to see my mom in that moment. That was her thing, to be pregnant and have babies. She loved it so much. It gave her so much purpose to have that. And she was so controlled, like to watch her. I've never honestly met anybody like that, like with such strength in those kind of moments. And thinking back on this, as I was writing this and really thinking about her, it actually makes me quite sad. It makes me sad because the memories that I have of my mom are so different than the memories that all of my siblings have of her. And I often feel guilty about that because I knew her at her best. And I don't think that any of them have ever seen that. And my sister Hallie would be the last baby, and it really marked the turning point in this, history of our family. And this next thing would trigger sort of a set of events that can never be erased from history. So when I was in high school, I was called down to the principal's office. I know, the principal's office. But for me, I was sort of like one of those students that was like very goody two-shoe. You know what I mean? So if I went to the principal's office, it was like a scheduled thing. Like I was part of Principal's Advisory Committee, National Honor Society, Teens Against Tobacco Use. Like I had a relationship with the principal that was like for the, betterment of the school and the student body. So to be called to the principal's office unannounced, like put a complete knot in my stomach. I knew something was wrong. I knew there's no way I could be in trouble, but I knew there was something wrong. I get to the principal's office. Yeah, gosh, I think back on like, what the heck was like, sometimes adults, the way that they do things when they approach kids just literally blows my mind. They sit us down, 3 people in the room across from this table with their hands folded. And they're like, something happened today. I mean, we're thinking like one of our parents died. You know what I mean? And they say, your house caught on fire, which of course is equally like crazy, but everybody was okay. They said, your house caught on fire. You can't go home. We looked at them and we're like, are you guys out of your freaking mind? So of course we get in the car, we race home, turn off the house, obviously caught on fire. It was still, intact, but basically it burnt the whole upstairs and into the attic. And the firemen were so sweet. This is a typical Midwestern house with multiple levels. And so when the house caught on fire, they came in and they tarped all my mom's photo albums. I still look back on that and I'm like, that was so kind of them to do. But the house itself, after the smoke damage and water damage, I mean, there was no way that you could go back to it. And so our belongings were pretty much gone. So we ended up going to live at my grandparents' for a bit. And this time frame, I mean, my mom really kind of started to lose it. This really put her into a tailspin, obviously. I'd never seen her act quite like this. It was like her whole world had completely unraveled and she actually was like watching a small child. And at this time, we'd also have another crazy thing kind of happen. We were in a terrible car accident just a few weeks after our house burnt down. My mom and I were driving and a lady hit us and the car completely rolled. My mom was not wearing a seatbelt and she was actually fine. The car ended up completely rolling and landing right side up with the tires off of it. We were pulled out of the car. And so, she lost that. She lost, obviously, the car is a, physical item, but lost that too. And I think it was just a tragedy. All of those two things that she just felt like she didn't have anything and her world was kind of falling apart. So we lived at my grandparents until we found this rental property. And by the time we moved into the rental property, my mom's substance of choice now became tequila and sleeping pills to sort of numb her a little bit. So tequila and sleeping pills instead of mint cookies. So I guess, the pills kind of replaced the mint cookies. I mean, as you can imagine, probably not a good replacement because those two things mixed together are really not a good combo. During that time, I was doing a little bit of modeling. My mom was kind of always obsessed with me doing that. I'm not really quite sure why, but we were at a sort of a modeling photo shoot scouting thing. And we were at this hotel and we met the band, the Monkees. Hey, hey, we're the Monkees. That, the band. And maybe some of us are too young to know them. But anyway, I knew them. And they were kind of on a, tribute tour. And so we met them. And my mom, I think, just saw this as an opportunity to be free and have fun. And so this newfound freedom had us sort of, traveling around with the band. Now, mind you, I was kind of in school. So my mom's pulling me out. We're, traveling with the band sometimes. It's really kind of a little bit weird if you think about it. And unfortunately, this, although fun, kind of started to bleed into our home life too. The fun that she was having. She kind of realized that by going out with me, I'm 16 at the time. She kind of realized that by going out with me that she got a lot of attention by taking me out. And so locally we lived by this amazing community called Lake Geneva. It's sort of a place where this lake town where the affluent kind of go in, Wisconsin and Illinois. A beautiful, beautiful spot. But we would often, go out to restaurants and bars that you were not allowed to be in because the drinking age is 21, BTW. And sometimes I would even one time I was in a bar and I noticed my old middle school teacher behind the bar. He was bartending, obviously, for, additional money for his family. And he knew exactly how old I was and did not say a thing. Here I am, 16 years old, in multiple bars with my mom. It's really sort of bizarre that nobody would say anything at all. Now, sometimes I wasn't able to get into the bar, right? Occasionally a bouncer would obviously try to card me and it didn't work. And she would just leave me outside of the bar with random men. One particular time, she left me alone with a man that was probably, I always am really a poor guess at age, but I would say he was probably in his 40s. And there was a limo that we had, kind of all of us had sort of arrived in together. And so there was a driver of the limo sitting in the front seat, and I'm standing outside of the limo with this guy, and he presses me up against the limo and starts, groping me and touching me. Now, I definitely looked 16 when I was 16. In fact, maybe even a little bit younger because, I'm 37 and girls just didn't look the way that they look now then. I looked like a 16-year-old girl. And this limo driver is witnessing this whole thing and doesn't do a thing. Now, I don't know why this person didn't go any further than sort of groping me and touching me and saying, vulgar things that I had never heard before. We don't need to repeat them, but I'm sure you can imagine what they were. And he didn't stop it either. And there were various other times that I remember, being on the lake that summer with my mom where we'd be skinny dipping off of boats with men we had just met. I mean, thinking back on it, it actually confuses me as to why I felt it was appropriate, but probably because I was with my mom and felt like it was sort of safe. I really honestly to this day don't quite know. But there was kind of a turning point this summer before my junior year. We took a trip to Florida with the Monkees. They were on tour there. And at the time, there was this boy band opening up for them named Natural, or called Natural. They were discovered by Lou Pearlman, and anyway, we're trying to make it big. And so they were opening for the Monkees tribute band. And one of the boy band members I started dating. And so I was very excited to go to Florida. And my dad completely freaked out. And I know that he tried to stop it. And I knew that it was inappropriate to go, but I wanted to go. I was 16. I was dating a really cute guy from a boy band. It's like every 16-year-old girl's dream. So there was no way that I wasn't going to go. And my mom, there's no way that she wasn't going to go. And my mom wants something, you're going. So we got in the car and with my dad pretty much chasing us out the driveway, and we left and we drove cross country, and we went to Florida, went to a few shows, and one night I had the previous night. Now, mind you, I'm 16. The previous night I had spent the night with my boy band boyfriend, and it was the first time that I had sort of, become sort of sexually active. And so when that happens to a girl, I had sort of like a feeling of like a UTI. And so I told my mom when we were out, and her advice to me was, have a couple of drinks. That's going to make you feel better and it will take the pain away. So I've never really drank before. So I have a couple of like kamikaze shots. And, I've never drank before. I'm 16. I'm a pretty small 16-year-old. So I have a couple of those drinks, and then we go back up to our hotel room, and I'm really tired and I'm not really feeling very good, and it's pretty late. So she has me go into the bedroom of the suite to sort of go to sleep, and she has a man with her. And while I'm in the room, she comes into the bedroom and I pretend to be asleep. And she ends up having sex in the bed next to me with that person. And as she is on top of him, he is reaching over and touching me. I'm pretending to be asleep with my legs closed, obviously. And I'm not really terrified. I'm more paralyzed and wondering, I can't wake up or act like I'm awake in this moment. The only way sort of to protect myself is sort of to pretend to be asleep. That's really the only thing that I could think of at that time, being 16 years old with my mother in the bed next to me on top of somebody while they are touching me. So let's just say that after that, I didn't really want to go with her or go out with her anymore, which sort of started to change our relationship and didn't obviously make her very happy. And when she was home and not able to have fun anymore, she started drinking more and taking more sleeping pills. Sometimes she would literally be sitting in a chair and suddenly just kind of slump over, like completely asleep. And fast forward, one day I come home from school and she's like, you know what? She said, I have decided that I am going to go to Arizona and go look at houses. I'll be back in a few weeks. We were all completely shocked, but at the same time, I was actually kind of happy she was leaving. And so she leaves. She comes back in a couple of weeks and she says, I have great news. I bought a house and we're moving in a month. So tell your friends. Now, I had grown up with the same friends since I was like 4 years old. I grew up in a small Midwestern town. Like, that was all I knew. And so despite all of those other things that I mentioned, this really puts it into perspective of like the mindset of a 16-year-old. That actually felt worse to me than all of those other things. Leaving all of my friends and moving to a completely different state, I was kind of excited, but also I didn't really want to go. And so we ended up in Arizona. My mom and dad packed us into a car and a moving van. Remember, we don't have anything because everything kind of burnt up in the fire. So there wasn't much to move. So we drive across country to this, it's a beautiful house that my mom did find. She really has great style and great design taste. And the house is beautiful, but it is quite far out of town. And it looks sort of like this beautiful dream house, which actually would become, in my mind, like the biggest nightmare of a house. But we end up there. My dad stays for a couple weeks and he ends up going back to Illinois. The plan was always for him to kind of come back out. But even though he made a couple of visits, he never actually made it to, moving out to Arizona. And I don't really remember the time frame of how long he actually stayed, but it wasn't long. And all I can really remember is just the transition into a new school and what that was like. And if you've ever been there, if you've ever been the new girl or the new guy in school, you think it would be exciting, but actually the rumorville and the gossip is especially for a girl, I don't understand how people can say such horrible things about someone that they've never met. It's interesting, again, like the mindset of a teenager and the things that, when you don't know people, how you outwardly, judge them or say things about them because, you're feeling intimidated or threatened or whatever that feeling may be. So being the new person, I ate in the bathroom some days. So if you've ever been there, I feel you because it is not an easy thing for that age group. My dad had kind of planned to come back and, at least that's what he said. But my mom, I don't really think that she wanted him to come back to Arizona once he left. Once she made it out, I think that was sort of her way of saying, like, she was kind of starting over. And she started having affairs and she fell in love with one of them. And we would cover for her when my dad would come and visit. But of course, eventually he found out and he filed for divorce. Remember, this was not the only affair that she had and the only time that she was unfaithful. And so I think he honestly was just completely over it. But it's really strange because I never saw my mom like really truly happy with my dad. I think she was happy with her children. I think she was happy with the purpose that they gave her. But because she wasn't truly happy, she sought it out in, other people. And I think she really did find a person that made her really happy. It just wasn't under circumstances that are appropriate for, being in a marriage. And unfortunately, he was married too. And what would happen during their relationship would send my mom into the deepest rabbit hole that she's never been able to climb out of. They thought that it would be really wise. He had a son as well. They thought it'd be wise and fun to introduce me to him, and then maybe we would date too. I don't even know. Anyway, I was very uncomfortable, but they drove us to dinner, hoping that we would sort of hit it off. And, we didn't because I was uncomfortable and I just thought the whole thing was basically just so weird. Here's my mom doing kind of another weird thing. But I did introduce him to one of my best friends and they actually did hit it off. And because they hit it off, eventually he kind of developed a suspicion and asked my friend what the relationship actually was between his dad and my mom. So of course, I think we're 17 now. Of course, she completely, spills the beans. And he obviously is very distraught and very upset, confronts his dad, confronts his mom, and the whole thing comes crashing down, which my mom has obviously blamed me for sort of destroying that relationship and being responsible for, her not being able to have the person that she loved. So after kind of some terrible, horrible weeks, my mom's boyfriend comes over and sits my mom down and tells my mom in front of all of us kids that he's going to leave his wife. And he's going to go home and he's going to tell her that and that he is going to be back in an hour. Well, I think we all know that people generally don't leave their spouses in situations like that. And so my mom waited for hours and I saw sort of all of the life kind of drain out of her as she waited. And also as some of my young siblings who had become close to this person saw that he wasn't actually going to come. And it gutted her. And she never recovered. Hey, thanks so much for listening to part 1 of episode 0. Part 2 will launch next week.